Fundamentally, Aaron, why are we doing this? Because we are in a much more chaotic and dangerous world. We cannot take the protection of our people, of our sovereignty for granted. We need to stop being over-reliant on the US. We need to be able to protect and take care of our own. So based on that, what do we do?
Stop for a second. For decades, Canada planned its future assuming one thing would never change. The United States would always be stable, predictable, and aligned. Now that assumption is quietly being rewritten. Yesterday, Mark Carney questioned it. Today, Mélanie Joly said it out loud. Canada must stop being overly reliant on the United States. That isn't routine diplomacy. That's a strategic shift. Because this isn't really about trade paperwork or budget adjustments. It's about power. Who has it and who doesn't? For years, Washington held leverage simply because Canada depended on it. Supply chains, exports, defense procurement, industrial coordination. When a partner depends on you for stability, influence follows automatically. Tariffs on steel and aluminum, trade disputes, political pressure. None of it required confrontation. Dependency did the work on its own. But that structure is now being dismantled. And the reason is surprisingly simple. The world is becoming less predictable. Canadian officials are no longer assuming long-term certainty in global politics. Instead, they're planning for disruption, economic shocks, security risks, sudden policy changes beyond their control. So the question shifted. Instead of asking, how do we cooperate more? They're asking, how do we remain secure if cooperation changes? That's where the scale appears. Canada plans to direct roughly $500 billion into defense investment by 2035. But the key detail isn't just the amount. It's where the money goes. Currently, about 42% of defense contracts go to Canadian companies. The target is 70%. That difference sounds technical. It isn't. It means domestic steel instead of imported supply chains. Domestic aerospace instead of external dependency. Domestic intellectual property instead of borrowed capability. And potentially over 100,000 domestic jobs tied directly to national security spending. In other words, defense policy becomes economic policy, because a government contract doesn't just fund equipment, it gives companies predictability. Predictability allows hiring. Hiring allows innovation. Innovation creates export industries. So the objective isn't isolation. It's resilience. Officials emphasize this isn't anti-American. Cooperation continues. Trade continues. Alliances continue, but dependence changes. When a country can equip and supply its own security infrastructure, outside pressure loses weight. Influence decreases not through confrontation, but through redundancy. Then came perhaps the clear statement. There are many things a country cannot control, including political shifts in another capital, but it can control how it invests in its own people. That line defines the policy. For years, Canada structured strategy around predictability from Washington. Now it structures strategy around unpredictability itself. Partnership remains. Reliance does not. And that marks the real pivot. Not away from an ally, but away from assumption. There's a sentence that quietly explains this entire shift. There are many things a country cannot control. Global politics, sudden crises, even leadership changes in another nation. But it can control where its money goes and who benefits from it. That's the core idea behind Canada's latest announcement. By 2035, roughly $500 billion is planned for long-term national investment. Not just spending, placement, because money and policy is never neutral. Where it flows determines where power grows. Critics dismissed the announcement as political language. But the reaction from industry told a different story. Aerospace manufacturers supported it. Steel producers supported it. Aluminum suppliers supported it. Exporters and defense contractors supported it. When multiple sectors align at once, it usually means the plan isn't symbolic, it's structural. At the same time, Canada is expanding cooperation beyond a single partner, deeper. Engagement with the European Union, growing economic ties in the Indo-Pacific, and broader commercial diversification across multiple regions. That's not distancing. That's insulation. Because security strategy is changing definition. For decades, stability came from integration. the belief that close alignment guaranteed predictability. Now stability comes from resilience, the ability to function even when predictability disappears. So when officials say they cannot control political leadership in another capital, it isn't personal. It's mathematical. If volatility exists, dependence multiplies risk. And risk inside supply chains becomes leverage. The response is straightforward. Distribute supply, distribute partnerships, distribute capability. Not reaction, redesign. This means future defense procurement won't rely on a single external source. It means economic pressure becomes harder to apply. And it means policy decisions remain domestic decisions. Some observers may interpret this as confrontation. But structurally, it's the opposite. Partnership remains intact. Exclusivity does not. Leverage weakens not through conflict, but through alternatives. When production happens at home, influence balances. When trade routes multiply, pressure diffuses. When procurement spreads across allies, dependency fades. That's what strategic recalibration looks like. Quiet, gradual, permanent. The relationship doesn't end, but the asymmetry does. And in geopolitics, reducing asymmetry changes everything. Because the future of sovereignty isn't separation, it's optionality.